Hi all, Randi Green here, and welcome to another Whole Future Humanities monthly talk. And this talk is, even though we are already or still in the end of June, we have already begun the next cycle of progression work as well as energy infusions that are supporting those of us who are trying to continue our progression, multidimensional journey inside this reality. I have decided that I will, as long as it makes sense to me, give monthly talks for free, and then within the paid membership, I will there provide other levels of information that is useful for those of us who are doing the inner work. We could say there are two different approaches in this work. There are the ones that are being enhanced in different ways or forms as part of the different projects of creating artificially via genetic engineering, the next level of the human civilization. And then there are those of us who are what we call the old school that are doing it the difficult way as part of an inner journey of clearing work, transition work, transformation work, and transmutation, and finally doing the transition. And this is a lot of T's. All of that you can find access and background information and how to do as part of the whole Academy free online courses. And I have deliberately put it so because in a way, when we talk about the multidimensionality of those of us who are ready to engage in the multidimensional perception and interaction with the multidimensional system that we are part of, we need some kind of psychology, some kind of guidance in how to do the inner work. And there are many different possibilities. There are many different suggestions. And this is my suggestion as I have found it to be fruitful and hold the frame of references to a type of inner work that is in alignment with the inner work I have done, as well as the inner work I recall to be part of the progression sciences of our solar system civilizations before it was occupied some 15,000 years ago. That's all ancient history, and even though it would be so nice to go out and make some kind of galactic history, it's difficult to produce galactic history. First and foremost, because history is relative. It's relative to the observer and how the observer has experienced that part of history. The idea that we can generate one type of history that fits all levels of the multidimensional reality and all of the different quadrants and all the different systems and all of the intersection points is an illusion. It's not possible. So we are left with the individual perception of a history. And that's the progression sciences as I have made them, the course material I have taken 10 years out of my life to produce for you so you can work your way through it, is to create that understanding within you that this is about your journey, and whatever you will come up with will be your reality field feedback loop. And with that, the understanding is, of course, that your higher order energy system, which is the holographic energetic template, holds a vast a range or array of codes that have consciousness and energy in them that are a kind of representation of everything you have experienced. That's your personal history. And that's part of the recall. That's part of our remembering of who and what we are. And as we understand these memories, similar like when you are working with your own personal memory of this life. First and foremost, as you know, I'm a psychotherapist. So for me, the first level of the work is the psychological work. And that means to go through this life and all the things that have been happening to you in this life, and then eventually expand it into past lives. And then you can begin to get into your multidimensional lives that you have had here and other systems. So it's the same kind of dynamic, the psychodynamics on unraveling the different energy patterns and different belief systems and the narratives we have around ourselves in a manner so that we can remove the distorted energetic content of of it. And trauma is a good example here as part of, it doesn't have to be a heavy trauma. It can just be what we call a childhood wound, if you like, a kind of a dynamic that has created a distortion, some defense mechanisms and onward. And in that, going through the steps of unraveling this to get a clear picture of what actually was happening there, and not through the lenses of the child that yet did not have the cognitive capacity to understand the dynamics in the situation, and hence produced a sort of idea of what it was, so that the inner child, the child that we are, could cope with that situation. And in that, created a frame of reference from where the wound could then be put into a shelf. There was a kind of a meaning to it. It became a kind of ontological framework that, to some degree, for some, produced different defense mechanisms and different shutdown mechanisms and different segregation dynamics that later on kind of prohibited the full ego structure to unfold its true capacity. I know it sounds very clunky here, but that's simply just because I don't want to go into all these details of this. That's part of the personal work. The whole idea of telling you this is that in that manner, the way we work psychologically with our childhood wounds or our childhood joys are the same when we work through our past lives. And it's the same when we work into the previous lives that we have had beyond this reality field. And as it often is, it's the memories that holds unfinished business that have not been completed yet, that kind of stands there like a fragmented pattern that creates distortion. And that's the work that we aim at, going in, figuring out, okay, how do I work with this fragmented distortion, this memory that is so distorted that it does not really help and assist me in living a full, conducive life, whatever that means. That's the psychological work. It is part healing the trauma of our past, but it's also to understand it. And the healing is, of course, something that we do. If we're lucky, we can do it with our parents if they're willing and eager to investigate it with us. Most parents are not, because in a way, parents would like that their children have grown up, become full-born human beings, and they have been good parents. And it's never nice to know that, yeah, you technically didn't do what you're supposed to. We know that's part of the process. Some parents are willing to investigate it with us, and then we can meet halfway, both of us, listen to the different interpretations of the situation. And in that way, we have to understand as mature human beings what we can expect of our parents in that situation, what we can expect of ourselves in that situation, and how the interaction dynamics are to unfold. What's the purpose of that interaction? That is to heal some core wounds, that is to verbalize it, that is to put forth an interpretation of something and then perhaps get some corrections, but it's not who's about right or wrong or who is to blame or shame or these kind of things, unless, of course, we're talking about severe trauma and we're talking about unpleasantries that some people do to each other. Then we're in a whole other level of understanding of these dynamics. But it's all individualized. And the communication is if we talk about a childhood trauma, for instance, our parents can listen, they can acknowledge, they can say, yes, I understand, and I'm sorry. At that point in my life, I was engaged in this and that, whatever. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you. But I love you. I care about you. You are the most important person to me. I didn't mean to hurt you. And I know I did. I acknowledge that. But what can I do here so we can repair this? Where do we meet? What do you need in this situation? That would be the mature parent going in and saying that, and then listen. And then at the same time also feel the pain, being able to acknowledge the pain of the child that it has happened. And then at the same time, not be too defensive, but try to take an attentive listener, therapeutic, transformational approach to the situation. And I know this demands that all parents suddenly become psychotherapists, which is, of course, not realistic. But that would be the ideal situation in such a conversation. And for the child that is now grown up, that verbalizes these things, it's a healing process. And most of it is acknowledgement. It's, hey, I'm here. This happened to me. And I won't carry it as a secret anymore. I won't have it as a a burden that I carry on my own, I need you to acknowledge it with me. I need you to accept the conditions of what you did had that effect on me. And in that, we can begin to work into the spectrum of how to build bridges and let go of the past and release that pattern. And then in our own continued inner work, develop processes that releases that. And then we can reparent using different types of reparenting frameworks, going in and working with the memory. There are specific techniques where we can erase the energy imprint of it. We can get to some of the defense mechanisms. We can cry the tears that are needed. And then we can give ourselves that kindness, that acknowledgement, and that ability to be seen and heard and felt. And it's a kind of realization of this is me, this is what happened, and this hurt. And I'm no longer alone with it. It's this joining together the acceptance of who and what we are, including our parents, what they could and what they couldn't do. And then it's up to us to figure out if we'll just let it go, because now we kind of understand why it was, and they were not deliberately mean to us, but they had their own issues. And eventually, after we have done our own internal healing processes, we just forgive and forget and let it go because it's no longer important. But all kind of thing that is unattended to, that stands there like a standing wave or a pattern of disrupt or distortion or fragmentation, will keep reappearing until we have dealt with it, either evaporated it or created it into a coherence pattern. And that's part of our timeline work, and that's part of our past life work, and that's part of our multidimensional work. Because what lingers on in our fields are the things that have not been completed, that has not been healed, and that needs a type of upgrade, so to speak, into an activation, an acknowledgement, and then a choice to do what to do with it. How do I then, when I now know, what do I then do with this past memory, this timeline injection, because that's technically what it is. A memory ties us into a specific timeline, a specific time frame, and it keeps us stuck. It's like an anchor point into the past that we have not released because there's something that's uncompleted. And that goes under what we understand as the law of the cycles. And I explained that in the Template Sciences, which you can also access for free on the Whole Academy free course website. I'll put a link below. And yes, it's an enormous amount of material, but so is all consciousness investigation and progression work. That's just the baseline foundation of it. That's the conditions that this work is under. And that's why so many have chosen to do it artificially, using the different types of genetic engineering programs. And whether or not it's supported by different extraterrestrial groups or not, it's all part of that big, murky, unclear level of the human history that has many different interpretations. There was as many interpretations as there are humans, unless we have experienced it at the same time. But we also know that even just go down the street with one of your best friends and look at the same thing, you will interpret it differently. With that, we understand we can't really produce a common history for the human civilization. But we can learn the mythology and the meta techniques of how to operate and work with our own history, not because we want to say this is what really happened, but because we want to say this is part of that joint history where I have unfinished business, where I have connection points, where I have a fragmented pattern that ties me into that timeline that is now literally fragmenting like so many of the old timelines of our reality field are at this point in time. And that's why it's important for us to disengage. Of course, we can say, well, if the timeline itself is fragmenting and going into entropy and eventually will cease to exist, well, then will that not take away our unfinished business, the anchor point in that one? And I wish it was so simple, but unfortunately, quite a lot of these past timelines, at least that's how I understand it. Others will say probably how they understand it, but I can only share here how I see things and how I experience things and how I have worked with things. And as far as I know, then the timelines that we are anchored into with our own fragmented patterns As the timeline itself begins to disassemble and fragment further into chaos and entropy, then that specific pattern that is in our own energy system that is tied to that timeline will also go into entropy and begin to disassemble and create more chaos. So it's a kind of that unfinished business becomes an anchor point into a chaos timeline that will then feedback loop into our energy system, chaos energy. And that is unfortunate. And that's one of the reasons why we need to do the timeline work and clear and disconnect and disengage and all of that vast amount of work that we need to do. And that's why it's called the whole academy, higher awareness lifestyle. It's a way of living. It's not, we'll do it 5 minutes and then all thing is good. This is a serious understanding of that this life we live at this point in time is to do the completion cycles. And that means to do all of the unfinished business, clear it out or create a coherence pattern and then reassemble it into our energy system from where we become an integrated being. And the integrated being here is mirroring some of the dynamics of individuation that Carl Gustav Jung were talking about. So the psychodynamics are the same, whether we talk personal structure or we talk archetypical structure, to use Carl Gustav Jung's terminology here, or we talk multidimensional structure. It doesn't really matter. The techniques are more or less the same for those of us who are taking this work seriously. So when we then understand why it's important for us to deal with our unfinished business and preferably not create new inside this timeline, there is this reframing of the idea of karma, because unfinished business, anchor points, timelines, distortion patterns that affects our energy system, that affects our perception of reality, that affects how we feel and how we interact with other beings, what we call trauma, is a type of karma. A karma is a kind of energy pattern that either amplifies our energy system into more conducive choices, that's positive karma, or negative karma that leads to further defragmentation and further fragmentation and further disassembling energy units from the coherence pattern into the distortion patterns. And whenever there is distortion, our perception gets distorted, our energy work gets distorted, the way we work with things get distorted, and onward and so forth. And the feedback loop of the law of reciprocity, which is principle 4, as I teach in my sciences, the transition sciences, as well as the template sciences, as well as the reconfiguration sciences. There's a lot of courses where you can get all of this explained in detail and how it works, and then create the framework from where you can begin to operate and work with your expanded version of psychology and psychodynamics and inner work that then goes into a framework that is in its foundation psychological or psychotherapeutic, but at the same time expands into past lives as well as our other multidimensional lives. I think that's more or less what I want to say here. But if I were to project into the future why this becomes important, then when I'm working from this level of relative reality of understanding the fragmentation of timelines that then feedback loops into our energy system and creates fragmentation within our energy system, what will that then lead to in the future where most of the timelines that we were once part of have become these chaos patterns? How will these chaos patterns, including the chaos timelines, because timelines just go from fragmentation and then into this evaporation, and then they just cease to exist. You know how nature works. It's kind of looking at something that's rotting, the long process it undergoes before it actually ceases to be there. There's this whole long decay process that needs to be done before whatever's there no longer exists, before it turns into fragments that dissolve and cease to exist. There are technically, I talk a little bit about that in the course, The Path of Liberation, which you have to invest in if you would like it. But there's all the other material. But there are first the completion cycle where we complete our unfinished business. Then there is the continuation, and that's why we begin to create the coherence patterns. So we have co-created and engineered enough of our original energy system so we can continue on some of the original trajectories, some of the original paths of the continuation of civilizations, and then begin to become part of the future civilizations that might or might not be there. And then that's all up to us to choose in which vicinity, in which dimension, and in what form, and onward and so forth. But that's further down the line. And then the path of cessation, and that's where once we have locked in, I want to go that direction, then we begin the cessation path, where everything gets that's the transmutation and the transcendence, where we then literally finish up, close off, get our business in order, and then once we're ready at the end of our very prosperous life within this reality field, chooses to move on. And I'm deliberately saying so because this podcast is out here in the open, and I'm deliberately choosing to give it a more positive vibration than some of the side effects of the future of these realities as the different timelines go into their own deconstruction processes. And those who are tied to these timelines, they will also go into these deconstruction processes. So the future that most of humanity that's on the main timeline, most of the smaller branches and the smaller timelines, the time frames and timelines and code streams, as it technically is in this very holographic, energetic, large grid that we call the foundation of a reality field, will then all of the lattices, all of the little threads will begin to decompose, and everything that's connected to that very complex lattice of timelines will then also go into a similar type of process that matches that. And that's a huge issue in the future. I think that if we look across the board of many different speakers and people and channelers and whatever the different accounts are and where they came from and how they've been provided, one of the key features that goes again and again and again, one, whoever and whatever you are is mirrored into the reality perception and the way the reality responds to you. What you hold in your field will to some degree impact your future of whatever you are to become. And at the same time, we also understand that whatever vibration we have will align due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity with the different aspects of reality that is in coherence or in correlation to the way our energy systems are constructed. So in that way, we are co-creating, and we are also the sovereign creators of our own reality, not because we are doing affirmations and projecting out, oh, I want it to be this and that, whatever, then we change the reality, because that's a kind of an overlay that's another level of distortion, because your entire field vibrates in a specific way. So no matter how many narratives and constructs of emotional and mental variations that you create and you live within that framework and that narrative, and that's an existential foundation of the way you operate in reality, it's just a surface level. We're talking about what happens after this life. What happens when you move beyond this version of your physicality, this version of your molecular expression. And that's where the reconfiguration, as I talk about in the reconfiguration courses, which are also for free, is all about the energy system. It's about your energy system. That's the one that lingers on and moves on into other levels of reality, not the physicality. And you can choose any teaching system that goes with whether spiritual, esoteric, or whatever it is. It says the same over and over and over again. We take great care of physicality because it's the current vessel we have, and it does have a feedback loop into our biofield, which affects the emotional field and the mental field. But when it comes down to it, it is what's above this or beyond this that matters. That is what will transfer itself, either by choice or by circumstances, to a new type of molecular state. And these are some of the teachings that we should take very seriously. As things are now in the main timeline, it's definitely we need to branch off. And you can look in whatever teaching you want that are working with these type of future civilizations and multidimensional aspects, and that we are not alone in the universe. They all, to some degree, state a similar concept that bifurcation is necessary for those who continue the existence of human civilization. We must become multidimensional beings because the worlds around us are multidimensional. And we need to learn to behave like multidimensional beings. And we need to learn how multidimensionality actually works and the huge impact we have due to our energetic constitution. What we are will be mirrored into multidimensionality when we enter into the multidimensional realities. There you don't have the dense blocking mechanism that we have in this type of world that we are currently part of. In the multidimensional worlds, whatever you are, have a direct mirroring and a direct manifestation ability right there around you. So if literally this, I'm just choosing an innocent example. If you have convinced yourself you're a tree and you have recalibrated your entire structure to be a tree, then you become a tree. That's what it means to be in the multidimensional worlds. And it doesn't take lifetimes. You can more or less, if you have a very strong conviction that you are a tree, you become a tree right there. And then you will become part of a reality that holds and houses trees. And that way, that's your choice. You're co-creating. And that's some of the things where we can say the current state humanity is in. That's one of the reasons why we have not been invited to the party yet. And again, I'm putting it in a very polite way. Okay, so I think that is what I will put into this little podcast here, which I'll put out on the free material. So we kind of have got the July material uploaded for the next cycle. And then, of course, I will continue as part of July month, the two specific membership videos that will come later on different types of topics that is relevant for the ones that are part of the membership level, tier, or whatever you want to call it, as part of the YouTube channel. All right. But for now, thank you for listening in. And until next time, that something is important for me to share collectively out here in the open field. Be careful, take care, take good care of yourself, and understand the impact that you have not only on your surroundings and other people, but also on your own energy system. Choose wisely. I can only encourage you to take this work seriously. And with that said, until next time, take care.